fake news and disinformation are a threat or pose a threat to democracy. They pose a threat to the functioning of democratic institutions, which is something we've seen already. But more serious than that, they attack the very essence of democracy. It is a very paradoxical thing, if I may put it that way.
Hello and welcome to a new edition of Blockchain Talks with Sebastian Cochinescu. Today I have the honor of having with me Mr. Ambassador Doru Costea. Hello, Mr. Ambassador.
Good afternoon.
A few words about you. I would like to introduce you to our audience today. So you worked for the Romanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs for 27 years.
True.
You're a career diplomat, and you've also been the Romanian Ambassador to Kuwait, Oman, Egypt, China, and Mongolia. You also have been the permanent representative to the United Nations and first European Union member state representative to be elected as president of the Human Rights Council. You have a PhD in political scientist, and you're now a member of the science committee of the New Strategy Center in Bucharest and the Aspen Strategy Group within the Aspen Institute, Romania. That's quite an impressive resume, and as I said, it's an honor to have you here today, especially considering the topics that we're gonna talk about.
Thank you very much indeed. It's great to be here, and I'm a little bit embarrassed by this flamboyant presentation. Anyway.
Well, you shouldn't be. I mean, it's what you have done, and I'm grateful to have you here today.
Thank you.
So we'll dive right in. Just a short introduction about this show, and what we are doing in here is to talk about technology and blockchain in particular. And nowadays we do have a special focus on geopolitics, and why not diplomacy? And who better to have as a guest than someone as yourself? So going straight into our topics for today, I would like to ask you, what do you think about the role that technology and innovation have in the current geopolitical environment? I know it's a vague question. However, I would like to know what is your take on technology and geopolitics today?
Thank you again for this very kind and exciting invitation. The dialogue that you proposed is absolutely fascinating, and I do hope that I will manage not to disappoint your viewers and friends, because in this equation where we have technology on one hand and geopolitics on the other, I'm a very, very beginner in the first part. As far as technology is concerned, to say nothing about blockchain, that's your cup of tea, not mine. But be as it may, allow me to introduce a couple of thoughts with a caveat at the very beginning. And I quote Schumpeter, the Austrian economist, who once famously said that nothing is so treacherous as the obvious. So while repeating the obvious is sometimes boring, it is, however, worth remembering every now and then obvious things that we seem to take for granted and we just ignore. So having said that, I'd like to build my remarks on the two components of technology, one being science and knowledge, the other one being innovation. Both, if you look in any dictionary, have at least one shared feature, and that is action. You don't invent for the sake of it, and you do not think about technology without having a problem in mind
right.
to solve it. meaning that we have to look at technology, to put it in, let's put both of these terms in one, as a tool for action. And we recall what Francis Bacon said, and then Hobbes said. Hobbes was his secretary in the 16th century, as we know, that knowledge is power, meaning technology is power. And this means that the very concept of power has suffered a tremendous change. Perhaps not finite change, perhaps not very visible, but it is there. The famous remark that Joseph Stalin is the parent of, how many divisions of tanks does the Pope have? Right?
Right.
This is no longer that relevant. It doesn't matter how many tanks you have. Of course, relatively speaking, it matters how many computers you have, and moreover, how many IT experts you have, and how much you know in order to manipulate, to use those computers.
In the 1850s, it's reportedly said that Lord Palmerston said, the British Prime Minister then and Foreign Secretary, said, "Oh my God, this is the end of diplomacy." He was talking about the invention of the telegraph and receiving the first telegraph message. He said, "This is the end of diplomacy." It was 1850s. Just to add it on what you were saying.
Correct.
Was it?
Correct, indeed.
Is it?
No.
Right.
I haste to say no, it is not. Before going to that, I'd like just to add something, and that is a little bit more about power and technology and geopolitics, with one of those obvious things. Technology is neither good nor bad.
Right.
It is how you use it. Just like guns don't kill people.
Tool. Right.
It's people with guns that kill people. So this is something to remember. Now, in the long term, in the putting technology against geopolitics, what would matter, apparently, according to some studies, will be who controls the infrastructure of technology, the infrastructure of IT&C, the hard part of it. And here we have some figures that are thought-provoking. And I think it was in 2019, a study revealed that Huawei, the star of the technology competition between the West, let's say, and China. So Huawei's share of sales was 25%. 28%, sorry. 28%. While Nokia and Ericsson had only a little bit over 15 and a little bit less than 15%.
When was that?
2019.
2019, okay.
So that's quite a heavy chunk of market that is under the hand, or rather the keyboards of the Chinese. Hence, a problem. It's not only money. It's also, of course, security. And there is something else too. Both in China and in the West, there is a marked shift from the state power to big tech company power. And so we have the influence, these new players stepping in the arena for geopolitical influence. And here we can talk another 3 hours. How and when and why.
I'd like to add here that, as you are well aware, there was Web 1.0 where everything was unidirectional. You could read something online on the internet. Then Web 2.0, what you are talking about, came along, which means you can read and write, you can contribute. And that's when Facebook came along and all these social media giants that have the power to control the news. And I would like just to introduce the next topic, which would be fake news. And a bit later, we'll talk, of course, about blockchain and Web 3 actually, which is decentralized, and what's made that made that be, or what future brings us. So in Web 2.0, as you just mentioned, the risk is that big companies, big tech companies, hold too much power, and they may influence the way we act, the way we vote, the way we shop, and everything else. In Web 3, it seems that the power comes back to people, but we'll get, let's not jump ahead. So infrastructure is very important. Just to sum up what you just said, technology is not bad by itself or good, and it's meant to be used maybe to enhance the human race, right?
This is one of the targets or the desired goals that technology might be useful in enhancing the respect and implementation of human rights, to take it from where you have left it. I had the honor of participating into a debate on that, organized by a Morocco think tank a couple of weeks ago, and it was an extremely exciting discussion with representatives mainly from so-called three world countries, and how you could see how they see the use of Facebook, Twitter, you name it, in order to support, promote, and raise awareness of human rights. But it is more than human rights, of course, or it's not only human rights, be them the key element of our political mind. It is also the political decision. You made a reference to the role of, and we talked about the role of big companies.
Yes.
And
Facebook in particular.
It is
or
interesting,
Meta, how it's called.
indeed. It is very interesting that the big tech giants seem to face a sort of similar reaction from the powers that be. Doesn't matter what kind of power. Is it democratic power? Is it authoritarian power? The reaction is the same. Grab the control back. Take it back from
There's
them.
a new player in town. Let's see how
We don't
tackle.
want this new player.
Yes.
We've been the state. We've been the state for the last 400 years. It's been us who said and set the rules of the game.
Let's see what happens in Web 3
There
when,
you go.
when decentralization
Indeed.
comes along and
Indeed.
people get the power back.
Indeed. And here we have the control concept. But before we reach that, which is, I think, a little bit later in our discussion, just a remark. The decisions taken by states so far, we know them. We know the problems that Facebook faces in Europe. We know it is a hot topic in the transatlantic dialogue,
Yes.
how to manage this. And we know what the Chinese authorities decided against the likes of Alibaba, Tencent, and what have you, in order to put them to their place. I mean, they just taught them a lesson about being too strong, too big,
Cocky,
too
maybe.
cocky. Yeah. Yes. So don't forget who's the master here. This year only, in about 3 or 4 months, the decapitalization of those companies reached $1 trillion. Well, it is a lot of money,
Yes.
even for China.
Yes.
Now, coming back to the political decision-making thing and the fake news that you mentioned.
Yes, I was wondering, what is it? Of course, fake news. It's a danger to democracy and the new wave of disinformation. Actually, that is heralded, not only supported by these social media platforms, is a threat to democracy. What is your take on that, and how maybe we may find a solution to this problem? And I don't want to imply that Web3 and blockchain is the solution,
No,
because I might be biased.
Well, I don't know about that, but they might be. They might have a contribution to this. I don't know, and perhaps the safest answer would be we'll see.
Sure. I was
but-
wondering, fake news and disinformation, and what's your take on the technology role on disinformation and the threat to democracy?
The short answer to the question is that is in the positive. Fake news and disinformation are a threat or pose a threat to democracy. They pose a threat to the functioning of democratic institutions, which is something we've seen already. But more serious than that, they attack the very essence of democracy. It is a very paradoxical thing, if I may put it that way. Sorry for the horrendous expression. It is because in the internet has consecrated the democratization of information. It made everybody reach and get information. I think in there are some figures highlighting the tremendous increase of the people who have access to internet in 10 years only. It more than doubled from 23 point something to over 51 point something at the global level in 10 years.
Right.
And this is almost abstract.
We have
number.
to speak here about the concept of leapfrogging in technology. So, as you
indeed.
mentioned, some countries went straight from nothing to mobile phones.
Precisely.
They just jumped over landlines.
Precisely.
And this happened also with the internet, and this will happen with the blockchain
There
too.
you go.
And then you have a sudden increase in the number of users.
So you have now every Tom, Dick, and Harry informed.
Mhm.
Now the point is that every Tom, Dick, and Harry can also inform, or rather broadcast, or
influence. Maybe.
influence, upload something, say, hey, listen, what I saw, or what I think, or whatever, who said what. And there you have a two-way circulation here. It is very democratic, isn't it? I mean, everybody talks to everybody. So, but the point is that as some people said, some people would be very tempted to believe whatever you tell them. The famous entertainer Barnum, the father of circus, used to say, there is a sucker born every minute. That is somebody very gullible. All right, if there is a sucker born every minute, there are a lot of suckers to sell your information to and make them believe whatever you wish. The fake news as a phenomena spread, particularly after the 2016 elections in America. And it became a matter of very serious concern for a lot of people, from decision makers to activists to theoreticians, because it was the problem was that it's not only psychologically difficult to deal with such fake news, particularly the famous conspiratist theories, but because now you don't have people who make up the fake news. You have the artificial intelligence who makes the fake news. Right. And I think it is no novelty for you, the so-called GPT/2 technology, which completes sentences. You give this technology, this software or whatever you call it, a couple of words, and it
They write a story.
completes the
on their
rest
own.
of the sentence by using some 1.5 billion parameters and gathering data from over 8 million websites.
So this happens also automatically.
The-
and
and
what's
this-
even worse, in 2016, profiling came along, and that means that you can target specific groups of people with the right messaging, which makes it more prone to listen to your agenda.
This indeed is what happened when marketing shook hands with elections
And technology.
and technology.
Right.
Because you don't you go beyond advertising. Advertising is very expensive, and it is well more or less visible, but it costs a lot. Whereas on the internet is cheap, is nothing, and you don't worry who may or may not
Pay for
neither pay for it or see it, because it will be seen no matter where. Even if you don't read it, you'll see on the screen. You may delete it, but it is there. And you see it today, you see it tomorrow, you see it in the
Persistent.
afternoon, and step by step, you begin to believe that Hillary Clinton runs a child ring slavery
Right.
in a pizza shop in, I don't know, in Manhattan or God knows what. This is a concrete example. I have nothing with Mrs. Clinton. But it was circulated during the campaign. So to cut it very short, the problem is how do you react to that? And various studies highlight a very anticlimactic answer. Use your good sense.
Yes.
So
But common
think.
sense
Common sense
is
and good thinking.
difficult to acquire when you're
It is.
exposed only to fake news.
It is.
And
It
for
is.
the sake of being correct, we need to say that social media is a threat also to authoritarian regimes. So that's why
It is in a.
they
here you are-
get banned in China, for instance.
You are here. You have
So not only to democracy,
another paradox.
but social media is a threat
Indeed.
to authoritarian
Well,
regimes.
you made a very an excellent point. Social media, as we know it, is banned in China, but
They have their own social media.
they have their own social media, which is used by tremendous numbers.
Everyone, basically.
Again, when talking about numbers in this field, they become abstract because they are too big.
Too big.
There are some between 7 and 800 million internet users in China, out of 1.4 billion people. It is more than almost double the population of Europe, right? That have access to internet. This is one. The other point is that if they ban Facebook and Twitter in China, they use it very happily outside China.
Right.
And you have the Facebook pages of embassies, of government, of ministries, of you name it, but not in China. So one begins to wonder what's going on there. The answer might be very simple. The algorithm, so to speak, the behavioral guardrails are the same. So you won't have any chance of seeing on the Facebook page of an institution in Romania, UK, France, wherever, a Chinese institution, something which would contradict the policy of Beijing. No way.
Yeah, that's
So
obvious.
this is it. Perhaps the blockchain technology may be used as a tool. I don't know, and I take the opportunity of shooting back a question to you. Since blockchain so secure, how? But it is secure in itself, isn't it? what about its contents? If the contents are less appropriate, then what do you do with it?
Well, in computer science, there's a non-orthodox saying which says garbage in, garbage out.
There you go.
So the information that you add into a blockchain AI database doesn't matter that you input. If the information is garbage or fake news in this matter, then of course you will have an output which is the same. I would like to just sum up our topic on fake news. Of course, this is a topic in itself for a few hours. However, do you think we are living in a post-truth era? Is truth still relevant? How can we enforce it? If
yes.
So, if yes.
I do not want to be rude, but may I ask you, what does truth mean? So this is. I'm not going to relativize to take it
into philosophy
in a superficial way, but it is a question, however, because of at least two things, or three. One is an old matter, an old issue that we are very familiar with. We remember, at least people of my generation, which are a little bit, have lived a little bit more than you so far. We remember very well the debate around the freedom fighters. Freedom fighters. Sounds nice. And it sounded nice in the 60s and 70s until it was revealed that some freedom fighters were fighters for anything but
freedom.
Right. So freedom fighters, according to whom, just like beauty, which is in the eyes of beholder. A reformist of the WTO will be seen as a destroyer of WTO. And this is an approximative quote of Pascal Lamy, who used to be the the Director General of the World Trade Organization, in a debate at the height of the crisis in 2007. Mm-hmm. And said, he highlighted that it depends on who wants to reform what. And then you have a reformer or not. Mm-hmm. So, coming back, the truth, the post-truth, it is a concept that I'm very careful with because I'm not at all qualified to talk about it. But I would, like any diplomat who's ready to talk about anything, diplomats, are famed to be a jack of all trades and masters of none, they say, which is not true. But anyway, what I mean to say is that in this respect, we are talking about a perception of something which we might consider as being the truth. But if you have virtual reality, and if this virtual reality is developed to its utmost limits and beyond, you wake up one morning and you no longer know whether you are dreaming or not, where what you see is real or not. And this is I raise myself the ball in order to smash it back to you when talking about whether diplomacy is dead.
Well,
yes, again, it is not.
It's not, definitely not. So, excellent question, of course. I wouldn't expect less from you about post-truth, and I guess it would lead to what is bad, what is good, right or wrong. Ethical questions that would lead to 12 hours of a show that we may do it someday. However, if truth matters, let's say whatever truth that is, it matters whom you ask, of course, but if truth matters and it's important, how may blockchain technology improve at least the knowledge of truth And how would you see a transition towards a more decentralized future? Because this is happening right now, as we mentioned, Web 1, 2, and now Web 3 leads to um, giving back the power to the people by using technology that is transparent, immutable, and may contribute in withholding this or supporting this truth.
True, well, true indeed. Um, I'm not very sure that I know enough about blockchain technology. I definitely much less than you. But I can what I have gleaned from talking to you and reading things and talking to other people, it looks like this may be instrumental in first of all in giving voice to people who may not be that corrupt in terms of changing the facts. So they would not be tempted to use it to disseminate fake news.
The
for
technology
instance.
levels the ground.
There you go. So it is a sort of insulated tool in front of such influences, malefic influences from the outside, perhaps. Now, but this, setting this aside, the other part of the question, meaning decentralization, this goes hand in hand with the democratization of information, which we mentioned before.
Yes.
Decentralization of decision, well, it is happening already. It is we see for instance, the commitment and actions of the civil society during the pandemic, and happily, even with us here in Romania, we had examples of civil society representatives, organizations, NGOs, you name it, that took upon themselves quite a lot of burden, quite a big chunk of the burden of dealing with the pandemic last year and this year, and so they sort of eased this burden on the government, right? It is extremely encouraging, beyond the feeling of solidarity, which is a key in crisis situation. It is also an example of how things can be done. And this was achieved by using social media tools as well. On the other hand, when talking about decentralization, you may also have the premises for chaos, for disorder. The authoritarian regimes, I think they have now a new label, techno-authoritarians. So, or they also call it technocratic authoritarianism or something like that. They use it to control reactions of the public. But
1984.
there you go. But we know, and you have just mentioned a little bit earlier, that there are cases when this control turns against them. And this is because you can control the internet, the public of the internet users, and that much only. But then it's there, and then you have the protests in Iran, for instance, after the elections in 2009, which were organized by using the mobile phones. You have the Arab Spring, the mobilization in Tahrir Square in Cairo, the mobilization of people who went there because they were called on the Facebook and Twitter, and so on and so forth. There is also another thing. Let's say that the authoritarians win, so they re-centralize the decision, but then they have to do something about it. And they can't anymore, because by definition, such a authoritarian regime rejects any input from the outside, from society, any critics. This is the nature. But look and behold, society has the bad habit of developing in spite of what authoritarians would wish for. And so, for instance, the Chinese, who have made a tremendous jump from poverty to middle income, now they start thinking that, all right, now I'm pretty well off. Okay, some 360 million of them. But I need something more. I need to speak up my mind. I need to say, hey, this governor is a corrupt guy. I don't want him to tell me what to do when he does not.
And then they have a problem from within.
And then they have a problem from within. So how you balance this? But this is their problem. Our problem is how we balance the decision-making process in democracy with a wider participation, ever wider participation, and a decision-taking that does not allow for endless debates. You need to act, and you need to act now.
Yes.
Not after 3 months of debates, and perhaps the result will be a wishy-washy thing, and so that everybody's happy. If you look for making everybody happy, you better forget it.
Yeah, I will never.
You never can. You can never do that. So to wrap it up, I think that in this respect, the decentralization and new technologies like blockchains are still at the beginning. I'm not very sure, but perhaps you may be kind enough to confirm or disagree. It has started mainly in the financial field. It was in banking, in investment, so in the money sector, which is very important because nothing works without money, at least for now. So, but it is not used elsewhere that much. So we are still at the very beginning of it, which calls for immediate conceptual work and regulation. Otherwise, it will happen with this technology. This is my wild idea, and I take full responsibility for it. What happened with the internet itself? Mm-hmm. The internet developed, and people said, cute, nice. 1993, the first email between the Swedish Prime Minister and President Clinton. Great. The first in 93. Mm-hmm. That is the day before yesterday, right? And now we talked about the size of the internet. So, but we forgot to regulate it. And now everybody scrambles to regulate. What can you put on the internet? Where is the freedom of speech? Mm-hmm. What about the freedom of opinion? Or what about, and there you go. The list goes on and on. Because when it appeared, nobody cared. It is a déjà vu. When Gutenberg ended his invention and put it to work, they didn't care too much about what would happen. They knew it was difficult. It was difficult. It was very expensive. So it was an elite thing. Well, it was an elite thing until it wasn't anymore.
And it led to spreading knowledge.
Indeed.
So that's what happens with diffusion of innovation. So just to wrap up this topic on truth and blockchain technology, we may safely assume that the technology in itself is not doing anything. But and I don't think it's meant to undermine the power of the states. However, it may undermine the power of big tech companies as we see them today. I think blockchain is more of a threat to Facebook than it is to a nation state. Do you think it's a right assumption to make, or am I maybe wrong?
No, I don't think you're wrong. At least it is a very fertile point to develop. Uh, I think we agreed at the beginning of our discussion that it is how you use the technology that matters, not what the technology is. How you use it. Now, there is another question, which is a damning question for any analyst, and I very humbly claim that I am an analyst. And the question is, why? Why do you do it? Why does whoever do it? What's the target? What's the purpose?
The agenda.
What's the interest? What's the agenda? So, if blockchain and other technologies of a similar ilk do not aim to take the power from the state, then what do they want? Why do they do it? Why did it appear? What was the reason?
That's the greatest mystery of our times, who Satoshi Nakamoto is. So I would like to ask you, and to go to a more familiar ground for you, let's say diplomacy. And how do you see digital diplomacy and its role in relationships between nation states, and what are maybe some future paths to follow for digital diplomacy? I know we are at the beginning. Diplomats are starting to use Twitter and other social media platforms. Maybe tomorrow we'll see them using blockchain. Who knows? I've just been invited to an embassy to talk about blockchain, and I'm very honored to have been able to do that. So they're definitely interested. How do you see digital diplomacy, its role in the communications, at least, between nation states, and what's your take on that?
Well, I'm very positive again that diplomacy is not dead. I won't tire to repeat it. It is not dead. No matter how strong internet is, no matter how strong the artificial intelligence will develop, diplomacy will stay there, because there are some things that can be done by humans and humans only.
So we are not so close to singularity yet, on your opinion?
I'm afraid no.
Okay. Okay, let's hope.
We are not.
Let's hope that.
We are not. By the way, just a quick footnote. A couple of years back, I think it was just before the pandemic, there was a flurry in the literature that deals with labor and the future of work. Even the Davos summit, the forum,
World Economic Forum.
right, had a session dedicated to the future of work and how artificial intelligence would change the work, and the threat of robots taking over, and here you have the Luddites movement 2.0, right? Well, it seems that there is nothing of the kind
yet.
It's
robots
not even yet. I mean, there is nothing.
But we do work from home,
of the kind. Period. Because what employers care for now is to find workers, not to find robots. They want workers because workers are scanty. It is mind-boggling. Several tens of millions of vacancies are now, as we speak, in the rich countries.
I've just been last week to Austin, Texas, and in a crowded restaurant there was a sign. I took a photo of it, which says "Nobody wants to work. We are understaffed because nobody wants to work anymore." And I was puzzled by that, and
Yes,
that's why I took the photo, and it's amazing.
Indeed,
Nobody wants to work anymore.
And more employers are more concerned by granting better living and working conditions to their workers than before. And workers ask for better living conditions and working conditions than salaries.
Which is a good thing.
Salaries don't matter that much.
Quality of life, it's a lot more important than the
So
money.
this is the end of the footnote. So we go back to
Digital diplomacy.
To the digital diplomacy, and we cannot but note a development which is obvious, like Schumpeter said. What did the pandemic cause in terms of diplomacy? An explosion of virtual diplomacy, of e-diplomacy. And you have summits on the internet. Summits organized by Zoom or WebEx or whatever. So it started with the G20 summit in Saudi Arabia last year, and the whole preparation for the G20 summit. No leader moved or traveled to Saudi Arabia. They stayed nice and easy, just like we today, and everybody talked to everybody. So there you go. In the first 3 months of Condoleezza Rice's mandate as a Secretary of State, and another Secretary of State, I will recall the name. They made, so in 3 months, they made 25 trips abroad. 25 in 3 months. The first 3 months. A trip abroad doesn't mean you go today and you come back tomorrow, right? A lot of days in the air, in the plane, in the talks, wherever, protocol and things. A lot of time and a huge amount of money.
Resources, yes.
There you go. What the pandemic triggered was the explosion, as I said, of virtual diplomacy in terms of internet diplomacy, e-diplomacy, e-communication, and so on and so forth, to such an extent that you have the General Assembly of the UN being held basically on the internet. There were some people who went there, but their number was far more less, to the great happiness of the New Yorkers, who every year are driven mad by what happens with the traffic in New York when you have high-level segment.
Do you think it's going to be sustainable?
Yes.
Because I've seen in COP26 more than 100 presidents and statesmen that came for this conference in person. And it was a huge logistical nightmare.
Indeed.
And because they thought the pandemic is almost over, so now they can come back at their usual business. So is business as usual after the pandemic is over in terms of digital diplomacy, or something will stick?
No, it can't be business as usual, because the trend was there, but it was timid. It was at the beginning. People were not sure. There are a lot of things. And when we talk about e-diplomacy, that are still work in progress. One is the infrastructure itself. How do you secure it? Romania has some 80 plus embassies abroad. How do you secure the communication? The hardware. Right? It's quite a lot of money. Another matter is who works here? Who works in this way? You have to train people to work in this way. You need personnel to know how to work with and to maintain the whole network. And the three, of course, the matter of security. Because this is...
We do remember what happened with Zoom at the start of the pandemic.
Exactly. And this is why quite a lot of people had switched to WebEx, which is considered to be more secure. Maybe. I don't know.
Security is a state of mind in cyber.
Perhaps. Again, danger is in the eyes of the beholder, just like many other things. But coming back to that, I said that it will not go. We won't go back to the usual. It will be a hybrid. It will be both
Digital.
e-diplomacy and face-to-face diplomacy. A good side of it is that technology in this respect may be used to, or may be put to work in fields that have never been thought about before. For instance, at the UN headquarters in New York, there is a unit which is called the Innovation Unit. And that Innovation Unit is dealing with virtual reality. What they did was to implement elements of the virtual reality in order to present to the diplomats how things are on the ground in areas of conflict. In Yemen, and there are 3 areas they are working on: in Yemen, Sudan, and Colombia. So they could see, they could feel with their own eyes how it is like. It's not a movie, by the way. It's not something let's make believe. It is virtual reality built by using real things, so to speak. They have made quite an interesting progress, and one of the officials in this unit even hopes that such instruments would replace the briefings in a very near future.
Would be something. Yeah.
So you won't have the typed pages. You have the images. A less esoteric example, and but not less not less useful, was in terms of gauging the state of mind of the population in conflict areas. They wanted to have an opinion poll in Yemen. Yemen is a mess, to be very mild. It's a catastrophe, right? So how you organize an opinion poll there? It would cost some $250,000, and it will take more than a month to gather the results and then to process them in order to make a decision on the peace process. But meanwhile, people will die, definitely. Yes. So what they did was to get in touch with the internet users in Yemen. And it was done with a modicum sum of money for consultancy. Sorry. The results came in real time, and they were processed in no time. So there you are. And they are very true, because they asked people in the streets. I mean, Ali picked up his phone and he answered the question. Right? So this has 2 sides, this story. One is how you can use this. The other one is how you widen the circle of participation into this, into the peace process.
And the time.
For instance.
The timeline.
Of course, you move very quickly.
Yes.
So I don't think that such advantages will be
disregarded soon.
They will be.
So just to sum it up, diplomacy is not dead for sure.
No, for sure. And I'd like to advertise an extremely educational book written by Tom Fletcher.
Okay.
The Naked Diplomat.
Right.
Tom Fletcher is one of the best UK ambassadors. His last post was in Lebanon. And he was widely appreciated for what he said there. And he talks about, or writes rather, about how internet, IT&C, and what have you can be and should be used in the diplomatic work.
That's very interesting, and thank you for recommending that book. So we are coming to the end of our discussion, unfortunately. However, I still have some, let's just say, interesting questions that may need more time. One would be that could we make a parallel between the golden age of diplomacy and the new wave of social media negotiations that we see happening right now?
Well,
I know it's a
I
tough
think
question to
we
have
could.
in just a few minutes.
We
However,
could, even if it might sound a little bit weird, but I think we can start looking at how the golden age of diplomacy, which was in the 17th century, started. And we remember the founder of the, let's call him the father of the international law, was a Dutch person, Hugo Grotius, who put forward the fundamentals of the international law and the law of the sea. Why he did it and how come that the Netherlands did it is another story, exciting, very interesting. And of course, Cardinal Richelieu, the same friend we know in the Three Musketeers, right? Who was the first to set up the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as an institution. It doesn't mean that diplomacy started with Richelieu. He just institutionalized it. So I mentioned those two persons because they were immediately followed by the Westphalian Conference that put the state in front as a diplomatic actor. And this is how it started. Now, do we have a Hugo Grotius in international law right now? I'm afraid we don't, and we would badly need one, because the international law is in dire need of being updated. It is not outdated, but it begins to show cracks. And if we don't mend those cracks, not by being more severe only in enforcement, which is definitely needed, but by looking at the reason of those cracks. Why did they appear? Because nobody has thought so far to regulate the hybrid war. The hybrid war, what is that? 10 years ago, nobody was talking about it.
Or how to react to former President Donald Trump messages on Twitter when he almost started a couple of diplomatic incidents.
Because there was, they were inconceivable. I mean, before 2014, how conceivable was
that someone would tweet in the morning something
that a state will just walk in another state and organize a referendum and say this piece of land is mine.
Crimea, right?
And there you have the Crimean. It was inconceivable, right? So there are things that, and of course we have the internet by the way of regulations. So this is why we need Hugo Grotius 2.0, right? Richelieu institution. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is a very conservative institution. Anywhere and everywhere. There are it's a very beginning. We are at the very beginning of updating it because the practices are very rigid. It is not possible, to my humble opinion, to change some rules, like protocol rules, because they are deeply rooted in the cultural fundamentals of the peoples represented in a room. If you sit, for instance, if you have something to give to an Asian diplomat, you never use one hand. You use two hands. If you use one, it is an insult. This is their mentality. This is it. In our own mentality, for instance, if you begin to scratch your head. It is rude in front of another person or something like that. So you need to take into account such minutiae, but they are like the pebbles in a shoe. How long can you march with a pebble in your shoe? They will ruin it. This is the relationship between, I think, we may build here a parallel, like to answer to your question. As for the social media, we have already talked about how, for instance, peace negotiations could be enhanced, their success could be enhanced if you widen the circle of participants.
Or threatened.
Or threatened. But this is a remark a UN officer made, and it is no secret actually. In most cases, peace solutions that are reached at after negotiations are perceived by those directly involved on the ground as being imposed upon them. It is not their solution. It is the others' solutions. Be them foreign powers, in most of cases. Let's think no longer or no further than the Dayton Agreement, which we are so familiar with because it's just next door in the Balkans. It was negotiated among powers in the area with powers from outside the area, but the perception is that it was imposed by the latter on the former. So it is not our agreement. And this is why you have statements like President Dodik saying that he will not follow this. No. So if you widen the circle of participation to these peace arrangements, the ownership is transferred to the people on the ground. And there is an example in Libya along these lines. With the preparations for the elections, I think they are to be organized quite soon, in a couple of weeks. How they arrived at an agreeable arrangements among various factions in a society which is deeply fractured. But this is not necessarily the social media we have been accustomed to consider. It's not Facebook. It is not Twitter. The way to reach that is similar to, but not exactly that one. Or it has some specifics. Of course, there will always be components of such negotiations or topics that will never be discussed on the internet. Because they will never be discussed on the internet.
Not even on a secure channel?
Not even on a secure channel.
So thank you for this parallel. I think I asked the right person, the right question. And now to sum up our talk, I think I still have one important issue to ask you and to get your opinion on. And it's what do you think it's the role of China in developing and maybe using military interest the new technologies such as AI, blockchain, of course, and space exploration, life extension. How do you think this head start that China has on these new technologies affects the worldwide geopolitical context? Well, are we late to the show?
I think you just decided to acknowledge the elephant in the room.
Well,
and
save
that's quite an
elephant.
elephant.
The best for last.
It is quite an elephant. The Chinese experience in high tech is breathtaking for more than one reason. Obvious because of the quick development I will not enter into detail. It is into details. The story is quite known and over publicized, if I may put it that way. While it is true, this is a fact. Second, the approach of this phenomenon has also changed dramatically. During the Obama administration, the second term, a very complex mechanism of dialogue was set up between the US and China, and it was called the Strategic and Economic Dialogue. This was the chapeau. It included over 60 or 70 bilateral groups and mechanisms, more or less sectorial ones. One of them was cybersecurity. There was not too much progress with these talks, with these groups, but the least progress was with the cybersecurity group. Why? The damning question. What happened?
Bureaucracy or lack of leadership?
Lack of trust.
Okay.
Mistrust, suspicion, and definitely the increasing awareness or realization of how far the Chinese have come. They are breathing down our necks, said the Americans. Well,
then.
Yes, what is going on here? They somehow conveniently forgot who started it. It was not the Chinese who started it. It was IBM who started it, for instance, in the early 90s, when they went there and began to invest in Tianjin. And this is where the biggest, fastest, number one supercomputer of the world is now, is no longer in the US, right? It is them. I mean, that is at least what the Chinese claim.
And
now,
we can expect China to use this power.
We can be sure they use it.
Yeah.
Because of at least two things. First of all, they don't see why shouldn't they.
Of course. But
they can.
How do you see the role China has on the worldwide context?
Now this is where they begin. They start thinking twice. It is very fashionable to put all the bad intentions and targets in the Chinese shoes and say, they are the new bad guys. Hence the new Cold War, which is a topic absolutely besides the point, or to a large extent beside the point. Let me not be that absolute. Now, the Chinese are using this because they have accumulated the let's be dialectical a bit, without being Marxist, right? The quantitative mass that will allow for the qualitative jump. They have a huge number of users. They have a huge number of people who think about it, who create IE, who create technology, and so on and so forth. It's a problem of numbers. It's simple. Now, so they can. The second, or another topic, or another reason why they do it, because they have fully integrated, or rather fully internalized, the concept of knowledge-based economy. It is a relatively new concept. We are familiar with it, even if we here are not doing too much about it, but this is another matter. Others do quite a lot about it. And the Chinese are building their concepts, their economy, trying to harness this knowledge-based economy. And you can't do that without high tech, obvious. Three, or another one, security. And here we come to the military side. It is a commonplace to say that the first and most important discoveries in technology have a military
including the
godfather,
internet.
including the internet. They have started in the military field. Does it mean that the military had the money for that? Of course they had. But who gave them the money? And why did they give the military the money? Because security was paramount. It trumped anything and everything. So the same happened to China. Gone are the days when the atomic bomb was a paper tiger. Right? No, they know it is not. And they know very well what internet and high tech can do to stability and security. And how those 800 million people, internet users, might react one day or another. And they have not forgotten, when I say they, I mean the authorities, they have not forgotten what happened in Tiananmen in August 1989, nor what happened elsewhere, for that matter, including in Piazza Universității in Bucharest, or in Maidan Square in Kiev, and so on and so forth. They don't want that. It happened, and those things in 89 happened without the internet. What about now?
Can you imagine what?
Can you imagine what would happen if? So, control. Blockchain. I think in a previous discussion we talked about that, and we were wondering what happened, what came into their heads, into the officials' heads, when they decided
in China
to block the mining.
Bitcoin mining. Yes.
Yeah. So why did they do it? And one answer might be because that process, that procedure or technology or whatever that is not under their control. It came out of nowhere. There were some people in, I don't know what province, in the eastern part of China, who were working on that and said, hey, what are you doing here? And if this spreads, it won't spread to an area which is Luxembourg size, not even Romania size. It's Chinese size. And in China, nothing is small, not even that grain of rice. If you look under a microscope or a magnifying glass and see how the artisan works on it, it is no longer small, right? So they said, okay, hold it. No. But then you cannot stop technological progress. At least this is a lesson the Chinese have learned the very hard way in the 19th century and before that, when they clamped down on themselves and shut the world out. Right? This was perhaps the silliest decision ever that the Chinese wisdom could produce.
Well, we'll just have to wait and see if shutting down Bitcoin was.
But
will
you
turn
know,
out to be silly
if
or
I'm not mistaken, and I stand to be corrected, they said, you don't do it anymore, we'll do it.
Well,
so they
not
sort
yet.
of took over because they perhaps, it's a speculation, of course, they would think that if, all right, we cannot avoid it, it will happen. If it happens, it must be in our terms or on our terms, and we must master it, no matter what. So we announced the cryptocurrency, the RMB, eRMB or
Central
whatever.
bank.
Yes.
Yeah.
The same
Digital
thing in
currency.
India. They did something
But that's not blockchain.
similar.
That's not the real blockchain. Let's say this is a centralized version which has a title of blockchain, but
Well,
it's not a blockchain.
of course, but if it works, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it might
Soon
be a
people will
blockchain.
believe it is a duck, right? So
But the answer is control.
okay,
And this is a dilemma, a very big dilemma for the party, theoretical dilemma with very practical consequences. And they are in a huge debate with themselves how to do it.
we have
will
to
see.
take into account that China is always thinking a few decades ahead, at least, if not hundreds of years. So
which
it makes you
raises
wonder.
which raises another dilemma. How long did it take for the printing press, Mr. Gutenberg's printing press, to become an everyday reality? And how long did it take to Facebook to become an everyday reality? So the speed of technology
Exponential.
and implementation has reached the point when you assume you run a sizable risk if you want to plan too long ahead. The Chinese, indeed, and it is very correct, very true, are famous for their long-term plans that they don't even consider long. They are their normal plans. Of course, they have the 5-year plans because this is the socialist lesson, never mind. Although some economists say that it is a very reasonable period for any economy, not only for the socialist economy. And by the way, it was a huge stupidity to consider that the capitalist economy develops without a plan. No, they are very planned, by the way. So, but coming back, they had in 1978, after Mao's death, the supreme leader, well, they did not call it supreme leader, but it was Deng Xiaoping, the father of reform and opening up movement, who announced a plan for China's development until 2020. That was in 1978, right? And everybody said, what is this? And the Romanian Communist Party had a long-term plan too, around the same date. It was until 1991, and it dealt with forestation. How many trees you put in the ground. And it had to be long because this is how trees grow.
But that was
They can't grow faster because the party says so. So coming back to China, they have not given up this long-term planning. This digital strategy of China was put forward in 2006, right? And they have updated it 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. Heavily updated it, so much that you barely recognize the initial plans. What they have now is the second centennial goal in 2049, when the Chinese People's Republic will celebrate its 100th anniversary. The first centennial goal was this year, 100 years since the foundation of the Communist Party of China. These two targets were set up in the latter part of the first 10 years. I think it was in 2008 at the plenary that they were put forward by the then leader. So in 2008, they planned for 2049. Well, that's long, isn't it? But in 2019, a shift occurred. and there is an intermediate target, 2035, which is more reasonable. Why and how? Now, this is another matter. Just to wrap it up, because we can talk about it 3 weeks from now, a long-term discussion, by the way, is that in this competition between China and the West, as far as technology is concerned, we have mistrust. We talked about that. But we have something more. We have the root cause, which is the system. It is not that the target is not necessarily to have the best or the swiftest computer, is to use that swiftest computer for my purpose, not for your purpose. Or in as I see it fit, not as you see it fit. And yesterday, there was a piece of news in a Chinese newspaper, and it was how and I need to read this. China's Baidu, which is the China GPS, in race with NASA over laser communications in space. And researchers are experimenting in China the use of Chinese satellites to create a laser network in space for high-speed link. They potentially transmit the data 1 million times faster than by the radio signal. You remember that a year or two ago, there was a huge piece of news on the internet about the use of the quantum computer in China, which helps the cryptic communication, unbreakable ever. Well, of course, we've heard about unbreakable messages, and all of them are unbreakable until they become breakable. But it looks like this one never becomes breakable. And this is a problem. God knows what they say in those networks. So it is a systemic, hence the systemic rivalry and competition that we hear about. The West is not that far, and it is a misconception that China is ahead.
Okay.
No,
that's good to know. That's reassuring.
It is ahead here and there, but all in all, it is not.
Okay.
They have apparently hypervelocity weapons, and the other day, 2 days ago, the U.S. Secretary of the Air Force acknowledged it formally, that they are in a competition with China, that the U.S. in the competition with China for the hypersonic weapon, which means missiles or planes that travel 5 times faster than the sound, the speed of sound, and something like that. And so they elude any measure of control, monitor, and counterattack. So they are using it. The competition is there. It is deeply concerning, and as you mentioned, this competition is moving on to the space, and now there is no limits.
We'll just have to wait and see. So with this in mind, I would like to thank you for coming here today. I think it's been a very interesting conversation for our viewers. For me, at least, it was very, very interesting. I think we barely scratched the surface on some of these topics. And I'm so intrigued and actually happy to, let's say, further the development on the topic of geopolitics and technology, innovation and blockchain. on maybe a wider scale. So I would like to send you, like the Chinese in front of 5 years ahead, the invitation for a sequel on these topics. And with this, again, I would like to thank you for being here today. I would like to thank our partners and sponsors, Netopia Payments, and see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.